I'm 33, a man, and I traveled the whole world the last 3 years. That was 85 plus countries.
I always check like what's the cheapest flight. I don't care wherever it is, just what can I afford. And I quite often came back with like, $5 left on my bank account. And just giving that out, of course, was quite frightening at the beginning. The only advice people give you is like do that 10 to 20 times and at some point it will work. It's not their own dream, but it's someone else's dream.
Good evening, or whenever you have clicked this episode. Is it an afternoon, a day? I'm happy to have you here. Today we have a special episode, not the typical expat episode, but an experience episode. Today I have Carl, and maybe Carl, you could say a few words about yourself first before I tell your story.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Carl. I'm from Austria. I'm like 33 years old. And I've been traveling now for the past 2.5, almost 3 years. And I guess that's why I'm here today.
For sure. I have to tell a bit the story of how I find you, or how we get in contact. I've seen you on Reddit. I hope that's okay for you to share, but
Yeah, of
I've
course.
seen on I've seen on Reddit and Ask Me Anything, and the title made me extremely curious. The title was I'm 33, a man, and I traveled the whole world the last, I think, 3 years, you wrote, and that was 85 plus countries, right?
Yeah, about
Roughly.
81 now, I think.
Impressive story. I read the AMA in preparation of this episode. I have to say, impressive story. I'm extremely happy that you accepted to share it here. Carl, maybe a few words about yourself. You said you were born in Austria. You're coming from Austria, but how was the childhood? Did you have the normal child? Because I'm trying to understand what triggered your curiosity to go in this direction after. 81 countries is an incredible journey. Before we dive into where it all started in Austria, I want to share how we're able to have these global conversations. Whether my guest is in Vienna or Vancouver, we use Riverside to ensure the audio is studio quality. Now enjoy Carl's story.
It's an interesting one. I would say probably quite normal. I think I grew up in a family where a lot of people were at least interested in traveling or traveled quite a fair bit. So like my grandparents, for example, already traveled quite a bit. And of course, traveling back then was completely different and much more difficult, I think, than it is nowadays. Now you just Google for something and it's easy, but back then it was much more tricky. And I think my parents like traveling as well. My aunt lived in China for a long time, so I've had like all these influences around me all the time that were kind of also eager to go somewhere else and seek out new places. And I think that's what influenced me quite early on to this travel.
That's really interesting. I never had someone to have so much travel in his life. Were you traveling a lot also as a child?
Not too much. Like we've had the occasional vacation, I would say. There's a few that were further away when I was very small, like maybe like 3 years old or 4 or 5 years old or something like this. Then we didn't really travel for quite a while until I started traveling myself when I was like 15 years old or 16 years old. And I started traveling with like friends from school or school trips or something like this. So I think just really early on, and then there was a break, and then I kind of got curious myself.
Nice. And you grew up in Austria, went to school, you went to university, you started a normal job path. Did the idea already was in your head to do this?
It's been in my head for quite a long time. So it's correct that I grew up here. I studied here, but I also lived in the US and in the UK. So that was kind of part of my studies as well. And yeah, so that idea of like traveling a lot in general even when I was studying, I was trying to travel as much as possible. I didn't have any money back then, so there was no budget. So only the places that I looked out for were those places that had the cheapest flights. This is how I chose. Like I had no expectation of saying, oh, this is the good place I want to go to, and I'll book a ticket there. No, I always checked like what's the cheapest flight. I don't care wherever it is, just what can I afford. And I quite often came back with like, $5 left on my bank account, and I knew I had to work the next day immediately. Right. So, so it has been in my head for a long time, but I couldn't afford it for most of the time, and was quite focused on just building a career and like saving money, for a long time. But the idea has been in my head for at least 10 years, if not longer. And that's kind of where I also started like saving up for it, and, um, having more or less like a plan in my head, but only up until like a few months before I actually made the decision, I kind of really refined that plan and came to like a conclusion of what I actually want to do.
You were talking about money, and I have to say the moment in which I knew I had to contact you was when I saw, I think it was the first or the second question that asked me anything, because that's what everyone is curious about. How have you had the money to do the traveling?
Yeah.
And I loved your answer, man. I have to say the honesty, I've never seen it anywhere. I look a lot on these EMAs, and I have somehow the feeling most of the times people are trying to show a different version of themselves. I don't know if you remember the answer. Do you remember it?
Yeah, I mean the gist of it, because that's the question I get the most, is like people asking me when I tell them about it, is like, how did you afford it? That's the number one first question by far.
And yeah, please go on.
No, go ahead.
And I loved how you said it. In that I think there are three parts answer, if I remember it correctly, and that was somehow told me that you had a long time plan, because you said saving, you said good planning, and I think the first one, which made me smile as well, was I'm missing the word now.
I think I just wrote privilege, right?
Privilege, exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
privilege. Yes. Can you give a bit of details here? Not in the privilege part, because I think that's pretty private. But I would say in the saving part, you said that you save up for about 10 years, Carl.
Yeah.
How was that process? Was that oh no? How was the process first? First, tell me, how was the process?
I mean, it's really, for me, it's a question of priorities, right? It's a question of how important is that really to you. And a lot of people that asked me that question of how I could afford it are people that are usually much more well off than me, or were born with more privilege than I did. So for me, I find it interesting to get that question of someone who's in a better position to do something like this than me, actually. And
Correct.
that's very often
Correct.
the case. But for me, it comes down to priorities, right? So like the way I live my life is like, I don't buy a lot of expensive things. I don't own like an apartment. I don't own like a car. These are things that are not important for me to own them. For someone else, they might be important, but for me, traveling was something that is really, really important. And so I started kind of saving early on while I was studying, for example. And of course, I had like some student jobs where you couldn't save a lot of money, but I had that money on my bank account. And just because traveling was a priority, I spent it maybe sometimes on traveling, and if not, then I would save it. But there was nothing else that I would really spend a lot of money on. And that kind of kickstarts the process. And of course, as you progress in your career, then if you're lucky, then you get more money as you progress from your job. So you can just save more money. But then it also becomes a question of how much money you're spending for traveling afterwards. I think this is something, I mean, maybe we talk about later as well. But for me, it's really about the priority. Like, we all have our priorities and what we want to spend money on. And this was something where I knew I want to spend money on this, so I have to save up money on this. And because you just mentioned it before, I think privilege, I mean, we don't have to go into it too much, but it does play a role, right? Traveling is a luxury. So it is really important to keep that in mind, and that everyone that is traveling and goes out, and even if it's just a holiday for once a year, this is a luxury. This is something very privileged to do. It's a very new privilege as well. Like, the way we travel hasn't existed not even for like half a decade, right? So that's something that is so incredibly new that we can do this, and we can find suddenly flights in Europe for like $20 or like $30, or going further away for something that is now expensive, but it's still much cheaper than it was like 20 years ago. So it is about privilege as well, and there are people that are privileged that can go traveling and others that can't go. That's just the reality of the world, and I think it's important to be honest about it, like, and to make the most of it. Like, I didn't choose to have the privilege that I have, but I try to make the most out of it, and I think that's important.
I think, Carl, you're touching a really important topic. The fact that we are able to travel as easy as we have today, it's something that was not imaginable 100 years ago. And
Yeah.
sometimes I think, of course, we are living in Europe, and I think this is also a bubble, because I think if we talk about people living in Africa or maybe living in Southeastern Asia, where we all go, for them it's not so easy to go outside. And I
Absolutely.
think we have to talk open about this privilege bubble. We can also call it in this case like this, where we say, okay, we are in Europe, we have the advantages that we have the possibilities that we have, and I think that's really worth mentioning. And thank you for doing that. I think that is not only the privilege that you have from home, but also the privilege of being born here, and also the easiness to travel. I think even being with an Austrian passport, the is the privilege of the passport. I think in one of my previous episodes, Priyanka said this, that people living in Europe are not aware of the passport privileges that are existing in Europe.
Absolutely not.
She was from India, and she said that she was living in London, and said, yeah, every colleague was asking her, why don't you go to Amsterdam for a weekend? Because I'm not allowed to, because I need a visa for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it is. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that the passport. I had a kind of interesting encounter in Tanzania at the airport counter itself, whereas I was back then traveling from Tanzania to the UK, and back then the UK was still part of the EU. So I just showed him my passport, and he asked me for my visa, and I told him I live there. I don't need a visa because it's part of the European Union. And the guy, he was working at the airport at the counter, and he started laughing because it was so unimaginable for him that I can just go to another country. And he really started like asking me questions about it, like because he couldn't imagine that I can just go to another country without having to apply for a visa. So it is an absolute privilege to have a passport where you can just very easily go to other places and don't think about the visa. And people people in Austria get upset when they have to like go to Vietnam or something, and they have to apply for a visa. Then they are like, oh, I have to go through this. So, we're just not used to it.
Exactly. Like when you live like this, it's just a matter of habit, right?
Exactly. Yes.
So Carl, you did everything. You worked, you saved. Was that the amount of money that you had in your savings account that triggered the moment to say, yes, I'm leaving now, or was it something else?
It was a factor for sure, that I just had the feeling, okay, now I have an amount of money that will give me kind of the mental safety that I need to just go out and not think too much about where I'm going and what I'm doing, and I can get as many experiences as I want to have without having that holding me back. I think that was one key factor. Then I think career progression for me, career was very, very important early on. So, and my career progressed really fast, I would say, especially in the last few years. And I just felt, okay, I'm in a position where I'm comfortable leaving the job market for a while and still being able to return back at some point. Maybe not exactly at the same point, maybe a little bit, I don't know, I have to like catch up a little bit or whatever, but that's fine for me. But I'm still at a point where I'm really kind of safe that I can return back at some point. That was really important for me to have that safety as well. And then just a few things came together. I ended a relationship just a little bit before that, for example. So I had that kind of freedom for myself as well, to say, okay, now is a good time to do this actually. So
It's a combination of everything at the end.
yeah.
What was the report between fear and excitement?
Um, a bit of both, right? It needs to be a good combination of both. Like, and,
Exactly.
I think for something to do something like this and really enjoy it, it has to be both. So, um, the excitement was there because it was kind of going into the unknown and just not knowing what's gonna happen, where I'm gonna end up, which countries I'm going to, um, and how long I will be gone, how much I will even enjoy it. Like, these are questions that then go through your head. Um, the fear was there because, of course, it comes with like sacrifice. So I gave away my apartment, I gave away all my belongings that I had, like all the furniture, stuff like this. And that's kind of an anchor that we have, is just the things we own, and the apartment that we are in, and kind of that safe space that we have for ourselves. And just giving that up, of course, was quite frightening at the beginning, because I wasn't used to that. It was the first time I didn't have a place where I actually live. I didn't have my furniture and all that stuff. So it was definitely frightening going out, seeing my apartment becoming emptier and emptier, and then handing over the keys and being like, okay, now I actually don't have a place. Um, that was very, very frightening at the time. You just forget about it very fast once the excitement kicks in. That's once you start then traveling and you have all these things coming up like every day and all these experiences every day, then you forget about that stuff like very incredibly quickly, actually.
You mentioned you mentioned one of the questions having about 2000 pins from Google Maps, at least on your phone on Google Maps.
Yes.
How was the decision making process when you started? How did you decide the direction in which you go?
The beginning was easy because I celebrated the birthday of one of my friends with another few friends, and we kind of, this was a planned vacation more or less that we had as a group of friends, and we went to Colombia for that. So for me, the beginning was easy. It's like, okay, I'm going to South America. I might as well just stay there. I'm not gonna go from Colombia then to Singapore or something, but I'm gonna stay in that region. Gonna have a look in that region a little bit, see what is interesting. I don't know. Um, I've been in that region before, but I haven't explored it as much. So there was still a lot to discover for me in Colombia itself, but then also in other countries. And then as I went on, it kind of became very intuitive, but also very impulsive for me. Like, I didn't have a plan of, okay, I'm going to be in Colombia for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and then this and this and this and this. But I actually just flew there. And once my friends left, I stayed for a little bit. I went hiking and did a few other things. Um, and then I I just had that feeling of, okay, now I've been a lot in the nature. I've done a lot of nice things like hiking and stuff like this. Um, I had the feeling like, okay, now I actually want to go out and enjoy the nightlife somewhere and go out and go to some good parties. So the natural thing for me to do was to check a flight for the day after tomorrow to go to Rio in Brazil. And it was fairly okay, the price. So I was like, okay, I might as well just book it. And so 2 days later, I flew to Brazil, um, and then stayed there. And that kind of became kind of how I progressed in each part of the world, just trying to listen to my gut and see what is the kind of experience that I want to have. And I think that was a key learning at the beginning as well, was not to focus so much on the places that I want to see, but much more on the experience that I want to have and what I'm actually doing there and experiencing there.
How long were you in South America?
So I went twice, and the first time was about 4.5 months, and the second time was a bit more than 5 months.
You have visited all the countries?
No, definitely not. No, no, for sure not. I haven't visited all the countries, so there's still like Venezuela, Suriname,
Mm-hmm.
Paraguay, some of these countries missing for sure. And then there's big parts of the countries that I've been to.
For sure.
Like, for example, in Ecuador, I've been to a few places, but I haven't been to the Galapagos Islands, and Peru, there's a lot I haven't seen, and so on. So there's still an incredible amount to explore there still.
What stayed with you after South America? What experience stayed with you?
Um, South America for me is really the place where I would say from all the natural wonders that I've seen that were absolutely incredible around the world, my top 10 list would probably be all South America and Central America. Even though I'm a big fan of being in Asian countries and I love Asian countries, and I love African countries as well, and even Europe is interesting, but all the natural wonders were all in South America and Central America, like probably my top 10. And I think that's what's really stayed with me, where I find South America culturally a bit less interesting than Asia because I find it more uniform. But in terms of natural wonders, like by far, all of the best things that I've seen were almost exclusively in South and Central America.
So you said you did 4.5 months in South America first.
Yeah.
How was the plan versus reality from the budget perspective in the first 4 months?
I didn't set out a budget. I think that's so there wasn't too much of a plan. Actually, it was all very ad hoc and very impulsive, like just spending the money on what I want to do. The one thing where I don't spend much money, and I think that's a sacrifice that I do as well, is accommodation, because that's the key things that will drain your budget is transportation, so usually flights, especially if you book them really late. And accommodation will also like drain your budget. That's where you can save the most, of course. So I stayed mostly in hostels throughout these 3 years, and that really saved a lot of money for me. Of course, it's not for everyone, but I think that's the biggest savings you can kind of make more easily. I think it varies from place to place. Some places I expected to be cheaper. Some places I expected to be more expensive. I've spent more time in Asia before, so I was used to having flights that were really, really cheap. So in South America, I was quite surprised by how expensive flights between countries are. And then sometimes within one country, the flights will be cheap. Like Argentina, for example, the flights were relatively cheap actually. But then you're in the next country, in Brazil, for example, and then flights within the country are really, really expensive. And then the second you cross a border, it becomes much, much, much more expensive, even though maybe you only fly 200 kilometers more than the next airport that is within the country, but then even the flight will be double the price. So, yeah, that's something where I had to adjust to the transportation just being much, much more expensive than I had expected.
Did you I'm not asking if you met someone on the way, because I'm pretty sure you met a lot of people on the way, but did you had periods in South America when you were not alone on your travels, or you did solo the whole time?
So I had 2 friends visiting me actually while I was in South America. Once was actually in the Caribbean, in the Dominican Republic. And then once was in Ecuador, also for a couple of weeks, where I had a friend from Austria visiting me there. So, but otherwise, for most of the trip, it was solo traveling. Of course, if you go to hostels, you're never really alone. You're not traveling alone, but solo traveling in terms of not being with your friends or your family from back home.
Correct. Did you, in any stage of the travel, had the feeling of loneliness?
For sure, yeah, that's definitely a big part. And it's an interesting part because you can be surrounded by a lot of people and still feel lonely, right? So that's I think a key learning for it as well is you will find a lot of nice people around the world, and you will find people that you click with and have a good time with. But then that changes a lot as you travel. They have maybe other plans. You have different plans. You go different ways. And that happens quite a lot, and it drains you emotionally as well. Like it's really draining because you start kind of a new friendship every week or every 2 weeks. And sometimes it works out, and then it's really nice to have it while you have it, but then it's even more draining when it's gone. And maybe you spend weeks with those people, and then afterwards you come to a new place and it feels like, okay, now you have to really start at zero again. And you don't know if you're going to meet anyone that's going to be someone who's nice and who you want to spend time with. So it can just happen that for a week or for 2 or for 3 weeks, you don't meet anyone where you think, oh, that's someone that I want to do this activity with or go diving or whatever. And that can be, of course, quite hard. Like, especially I found it hardest when I met people that I really liked. And I had it, for example, in Thailand. I met 2 people and I spent like 2 weeks basically 24/7 with them. And then when I left from there and I went to a different island, I arrived there and for a week I really didn't want to see anyone or meet anyone, because I just felt like so drained from that now I have to start from zero again. And I just had this amazing experience with 2 people that it kind of made me feel quite lonely afterwards, but in a sense that I also don't want to meet anyone else, which is kind of strange, but it does play a big
It's
for sure, for sure. I mean, you're far away from your friends, you're far away from your family. Of course, you can FaceTime, but it's, I mean, since the pandemic, we all know that's not the same as seeing someone in person. And yeah, it can be really hard. Like even being surrounded by people, you can feel really lonely.
this thing with the friendship, and like you said, 2 weeks of spending time with someone, you actually feel like a relationship is ended, right?
Mm.
Like a love relation. I mean, because it's not a love relationship, but it's a person, like you said, you spend 24/7 with someone, and then you feel like, oh, why did it have to end? Why? Like, how can I start it from scratch? And I think that's, of course, it sounds strange, but it is like this.
No, it is like this, and it's the intensity of those friendships as well. Is because you usually, like, if you make new friends, like you have if you have your work and your things that you're doing, even if you go to a new place, there's only so much time you can spend with them, like in a week. Maybe you're gonna see them like twice, or it's already
Correct.
a lot if you see them like 3 times for a couple of hours. But you're not going to spend like 2 weeks 24/7 with them and then do all of these amazing experiences. And it's just one great experience after another that you're doing. Um, Usually this is the amount of time that you spend is usually what you would spend with someone in maybe like half a year. And so it feels also so much more intense when you find those people and you spend the time with them. And so, as you said, it feels like your breakup afterwards, when you leave again, because you've spent in such a short amount of time so much time with them and experienced so much with them that it just feels much more intense than if you would do that slowly.
Correct. What was the next step after South America, Carl?
So for me at the beginning, that was kind of very clear for me. My big interest was always to go to more Asian countries, see more of Asia, 100%.
Hmm.
Um, that's where most of my interest lied at that time. So for me, it was clear, okay, I'm going from South America back home for the summer, stayed like about a month, maybe a bit longer. Um, and then just, repacked my stuff, left a lot of stuff back home as well that I didn't need. And then it was clear for me to fly to Asia. I didn't know where to start at the beginning. We're in Asia. For me, the process is quite chaotic. Like I then look at a lot of different places and I look at videos on Instagram and TikTok and blah, blah, blah. And then I look around, and I can't make a decision. And then I make a very fast decision. I'm like, okay, I'm going to fly to this place in like 3 days. Instead of planning it like beforehand and saying like, okay, I'm going to do this. So for me, I just really decided very quickly. I was like, okay, I'm already too long back home. I'm going to fly in like 4 days to Bali, and I'm just going to spend a month there, see what it's about, see how it is. And then from there, I will go to Singapore. And then from there on, I don't know. So that was the process kind of. I knew exactly that I want to go to Asia. I didn't know exactly where, but I then kind of figured out where I should start.
But this is the benefit of having don't of not having the time limit, right?
Mm.
So because I do think that we all make plans because of the time limit that we have. We always have 2 weeks of holiday or 3 weeks of holiday, or I don't know, a long weekend here, a long weekend there, and then you need
Yeah.
this tight plan. You need to know where you go and what you do. But
Yes, of
for
course.
you didn't have this. So um you said you were back in Austria for 1 month.
Mm.
Was because of the fact that you needed to be the people with the people you know again, or was just how it worked out?
I think at this point, so the first time I went back home, I think was more just how it worked out.
Hmm.
Um, just because I had the feeling, okay, it makes sense to go back home. I mean, I love the summer in Europe as well. It's just amazing. So
It's only 1 month, unfortunately.
more or less, yeah. No, but for me, it just kind of felt like the natural progression of going from South America, going back home, repacking all my stuff, kind of rethinking what my plans are, and then going back to Asia. It was a little bit about the people, but I think the first time I went back home, it was a bit less about seeing my friends because not so much time had passed. That became more important, I think, as I progressed, like then the years afterwards, that became more and more important to go back to see my friends and my family, and spend time with people that I've known for like decades. Not so much the first time, I have to admit.
I hope they don't watch this.
Yeah.
I miss you. You miss me. Yeah, okay, a bit, but I'm
Not so
here.
much the first time.
So you went you said Bali then 1 month, right?
Yeah.
How is Bali to experience for 1 month?
Really, yeah, I don't know. The thing is, I didn't have too much of an expectation of Bali because I've heard of Bali a little bit before, but I wasn't, let's say, on Instagram or something targeted by any content from Bali or something like this. So I wasn't in that travel bubble where I would see Bali pop up constantly. So I went in with quite an open mind, which in hindsight I found very nice. Not to have any expectation. I hadn't even seen like a lot of pictures. Like I've seen like probably like 10 pictures or something of Bali. That's all I knew from Bali. So it was, I don't know how I dodged all the content because
I really don't understand. I have to be honest because I also not, but I see them.
yeah, I know. No, now it's everywhere. Now it's also on my feed everywhere. But back then, it wasn't, and that was actually quite a nice experience. So I just came there with an open mind. I didn't know what to expect. I just knew I wanted to see like as many parts of Bali as possible, and traveled around quite a bit. Met some really nice people there as well, and I had a really, really good time. It wasn't the biggest adventure I had, on like traveling the world because Bali is easy to travel around. There's infrastructure, it's cheap. There's electricity 24/7. There is Wi-Fi and internet 24/7. That's not given on other islands in Asia specifically. And so that makes it really easy to go around and just explore the island. Of course, it's very, very commercialized. So it's not the biggest adventure that I've had, but I think it's a really nice place to go to and also have like a routine. You can go there, there's like nice gyms, there's like nice places to eat, there's still a lot of places you can see. And the tourist bubble there is very condensed to the south part of Bali. And once you leave that bubble, you're actually very fast in I would say more rural areas of Bali that are still more like, I imagine Bali to be like 20, 30 years ago. So you still have those places there, but you have both. And I really like that contrast there, that you have both this like very traditional part, but at the same time you have this commercialized part. Of course, there's a lot of tourists there every year. It's a crazy, insane amount of tourists actually there. So there are some parts that I went to that I absolutely didn't like, and I've never went there again. Because they were just too over commercialized. But you find everything. You find the best and the worst of all worlds, I think, there. So it's really interesting to just spend time there.
You mentioned Instagram and the touristic bubble and so on. I realized that at least in the last period, I mean, in a kind of this nomad bubble where everyone is posting the amazing place in which they work. And I want to ask you, maybe generally about Asia, but especially about Bali. Have you had the feeling that exists this nomad bubble there, like people working there and living, like remote working?
Yeah, for sure. Well, in Bali, more than in any other place in the world, probably at least that I've seen so far. The digital nomad bubble is really huge. There's a lot of co-working cafes, a lot of spaces that tender to those digital nomads for sure. And I understand it. Of course, it's a place where you can live with very little money in a very nice way, especially if you're coming from Europe or Australia or the US or these places.
Mhm.
And then, as I said, you have Wi-Fi 24/7. That's really fast and good. You have electricity all the time. That's really fast and really good. You have good food from all over the world. You can go to a Greek restaurant or to an Italian restaurant or to a Chinese restaurant or
Interesting.
whatever. So you have any food that you could imagine, you have there in really high quality as well. And you have a lot of activities. You have mountains there. You have to see. You have the
Mhm.
jungle. You have cinemas. So on and so on, right? So there's so many things that you can do there in a very small condensed space. So you don't have long travel times as well. Um, so of course, as a digital nomad, I think it's a really, really interesting and nice place. It has a lot of events also for digital nomads to meet other people and so on. So it's quite sociable. Of course, it has a lot of bad sides as well. There's a huge trash problem. There's over tourism and so on and so on. So that, of course, brings a lot of negative things as well to the island. Um, for me, that's what makes it interesting because it's not this over polished place that just tries to look nice on every corner, but it's quite immediate to see the problems that exist there. Um, and I like to have the contrast of just normal life as well. But there is, of course, this nomad bubble there that exists and is quite strong there.
You mentioned things which we take for as given in Europe, right? Like trash. We don't have a trash issue. We have electricity. We have internet, and so on. What was the worst place from perspective of electricity, internet, and so on that you have visited? And you see the worst. When I say
Yeah,
worst,
yeah.
I don't mean actually.
Well, I think the worst place, I think where I've experienced it myself the most was in the Philippines on some islands, which totally makes sense because some of these islands, there's not a lot of infrastructure, there's not a lot of people living even there. Um, and they were struggling with electricity, especially when there was like a lot of rain coming or flooding or something like this. Then that was a huge problem that there was no electricity for like 1 or 2 days on the island. And without the electricity, you didn't have any internet as well. You didn't have any reception on your phone as well. Um, and you couldn't flush the toilet even as flushing the toilet was electric. So, so the water pumping system on the whole island was electric. Um, so that created a lot of problems quite quickly. For me, like traveling, that was not an issue. But at the time, for example, I was traveling with my brother, and he needed to work remotely, so that became an issue quite quickly then. And it's not something that you can plan for because you don't know it beforehand. And also, while it happens, you never know how long it lasts. The first time it happened, they told us it's gonna be fixed in like 3-4 hours, and it took 2 days. So it's really makes it really difficult to plan. So there are some of these places where it's harder, and it's usually, especially islands, just I think it's just much more difficult to make a reliable power grid and internet and things like these
For
in,
sure.
in islands that are not very developed.
So I think you rely on electricity for everything. Like you said, even the flushing system does not about the water, and
Yeah,
everything is relying on electricity. And if you don't have it, then it creates huge issues for sure.
absolutely. Yeah.
How long was the first period in Asia, Carl?
Um, that was again about 4 months, 4 or 5 months. I was until about Christmas time. And then I went back home for Christmas for about 2.5 weeks, and then back to Asia actually right away.
Oh,
Because I had
okay.
the feeling like, okay, I've kind of seen a little bit of it, but there's still a lot that I kind of want to explore and a lot of things that I want to do. So it was clear for me to go back to Asia immediately.
You said you didn't like the over touristic places. What was the place where you had the feeling you are the first tourist walking in? It's a bit
um,
of exaggeration, but I think you know what I mean.
yeah. There were a few places that felt like this a little like to different extents. Um, like in East Asia, it was more difficult. Like Southeast Asia, for example, Thailand, on these places, they are very catered to tourists, so they are very used to tourists. So it's more difficult to find a place where you really feel like, okay, you're the first one. I think in that part of the world, Nepal in the mountains felt even though I knew it wasn't true, it felt a little bit like it because we just didn't have any reception. We hadn't booked anything. We were just hiking, and we just went to the next village that we could arrive in within a day of hiking, and just asked around at the guest houses, like, hey, do you have any space? Do you have any space? And we were in low season, so there was really very, very, very few people that we met along the way there. And that kind of felt like we're exploring a place, because you don't see any tourists for days, and then you just go to a village and you ask, hey, can I sleep here? And it kind of felt like out of a movie or something, that to have that freedom. And then I think the other places were the ones that are just really less frequented by tourists, like Kazakhstan, for example, and Kyrgyzstan. That's where I really felt like, okay, there's so few tourists there that you really stand out as a tourist there, and people are so interested and they are so surprised to see a tourist all the time. And they really gave you that feeling, okay, wow, here, no one has been here for like weeks or months or even years, who knows? Even though maybe that's also not completely true, but you just quickly had that feeling that no one was there. And I think the last destination where I went to, which was Timor-Leste, which is a country most people don't even know or ever heard about. And that has very, very few tourists. So that has less tourists per year than Bali has in a single day. And that really felt like we're in a place that no one has ever stepped foot here. So
that sounds so interesting. So first of all, the confidence to have to hike to the next village and then to go inside the house to ask them for a place to sleep. I think that's something that I have to say, respect for that. I mean, that must have been really interesting, at least the first time, of course.
Yeah. The first time was interesting, but then it kind of, I mean, it became more natural, and we were so welcomed by the people along the way, and it was really, really cheap to stay at their places. Like, all of them had like extra rooms and stuff where you can sleep. So, and they were incredibly welcoming. So, that just made it really comfortable, like quickly. Of course, the first time you're a little bit like, it's a little bit strange to go to a place without having booked anything.
Especially in our experience, Carl, because maybe for them not, but in our experience, it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, for our experience, like, it's normal. You pick up the phone, you go on any website where you can book hotels, and you just book something at least for one night, right? And there we just went along, and it was actually perfect. I'm really glad that I didn't book anything beforehand, because we could have booked something beforehand, but this gave us so much freedom to really decide along the way just where we want to stay, and maybe skip one village if we didn't think this is the place where we want to stay, and then just go to the next one and just stay there for the night. And then, not knowing, like, the day you wake up in the morning, you don't know where you're going to end up. You have no idea how we didn't look at any pictures before, the same, like, we didn't know how it's going to look like, the way there, and the villages along the way. We didn't have any idea. And we just went along with it, and it was always, the full day was a surprise, basically. And that was amazing.
That's a really nice experience. I can imagine that. The fact that you don't know what to expect, and you have an amazing experience. I always say, ever, that if we all would lower our expectations, we would have a much happier life.
No, absolutely.
Carl, you are speaking Austrian, German. You are speaking an amazing English. Have you ever had issues with getting along with the locals in any of the countries where you've been?
Not really. Like, of course, there's a language barrier in a lot of countries. My experience was that people will still do their best and try. They will still, in a lot of places, they will still continue in their local language, and you will still continue in English. and you just use your hands and feet, and it somehow is going to work out.
And that experience that if someone is speaking, I don't know if you made that experience, but if someone is speaking louder and not so as fast, they have the feeling that now that you must understand.
Yeah,
it has to work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you don't have to travel far to have that experience, right? If I go to Italy from here, I would have a very similar experience, probably. Or to Hungary, and I had the experience in a lot of places, but people were really trying just make themselves understood, use their hands and feet, and just trying to help you in some way if they can. For me, what has really helped is to learn in as many local languages as possible, at least to say hello and thank you. Or how are you, or something, like very basic phrases in each place, because people will, even if you cannot have a conversation, people will really appreciate that you've made at least a tiny bit of effort. And I've really tried in every country. I think there's only one country where I didn't learn thank you because it was too complicated. But other than that, it was okay. So
Now I have to ask, what was that country?
it was Armenia, and I have tried. I've asked an Armenian friend to pronounce it for me, and I've given up still. So it is really difficult to say thank you in Armenian. In most other languages, it was a bit easier.
Carl, how long was your second period in Asia?
So that was again about like 5 months, I think, 5.5 months, something like this. Yeah.
I see a sweet spot there, somewhere between 4 and 6 months. Is it something which is somehow is the moment when you feel, okay, now I need a break from this?
That's what I've realized. I think after the second time I left, is when I started, I thought I'm gonna be traveling for a very long time, and I thought I want to be gone for like a year or for like 1.5 years or even longer, without coming back. And I've realized that that's the sweet spot for me, is like somewhere between 4 and 6 months. Always depending on what I do and where I go. Like 6 months, I think, is almost already a stretch, depending on how long you actually stay in one place. I didn't stay too long in like one place at a time, and I think that also changed, that made that amount of time that I wanted to stay gone shorter, because I craved like having a routine, having the same kind of people around me. And maybe staying in one place for longer would give you all these things also away from your home. But for me, it really became that sweet spot, was like between 4 and 6 months, where I realized after 4 to 6 months, okay, like now I'm really craving to see my friends. I'm really craving to see my family and to be surrounded by the same people, not having to make decisions every day, where I go to eat, where I go, which bus I take, and so on and so on. That really became kind of the sweet spot for me, and also a spot where I felt like, okay, I'm starting to enjoy this much less, and it takes much more for me to be excited and to be surprised by something, or to be to just enjoy it, because I'm so saturated with experiences and with seeing new things that I think it's really hard for my brain also to process anything new that comes in. And I really had that feeling, okay, I need to go back to a place that I actually know, where I am not constantly bombarded by new experiences, for me to actually process everything that happened, and then becoming excited again to see like new things and experiencing new stuff.
It's crazy that you, for everyone that doesn't experience this, is crazy that you would say, I need holiday from holiday.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you want to put it in a sentence, this is what it is. But I fully understand it. Like
Yeah.
you can have the limited amount of new, and then you say, okay, but then it's still new. I said it yesterday, so I need a break from this. But it really makes sense.
Yeah.
Carl, what was the most unexpected good experience with food that you have had?
With food?
Yeah.
Interesting one. And then no one has asked me that question before. People ask where the worst food was and where the best food was. The most unexpected with food. Now I have to think.
Unexpected good. The thing is, I want to give you a bit of context. We always know about good food, right?
Mhm.
We always talk about good food, about bad food, and we have some kind of patterns there. But you have a lot of situation in which you don't expect much of a local food, and then you think, wow, that was impressive, even though I had expected nothing from it.
Mhm. Yeah. I think there's like two places that come to my mind. One of them is Bali again. And this is a place again where I went in without any expectation. and was completely surprised by the quality of food there. In every cuisine that they cook, like the local one. I love Indonesian food. It's really an amazing cuisine as well. I was quite surprised by how spicy they can eat. I didn't expect that as well. That was quite tough sometimes. Um, but then also the quality that in which they can make food from anywhere in the world, and you will find Indonesian chefs that will make Italian food that is incredibly well cooked, or any cuisine that you can imagine, basically from around the world, and they will be able to make it to absolute perfection. That was quite surprising to see that in a place where I didn't expect that. I think the other one where it's more about the local food is when I spent a lot of time in South America. I went then to Central America, to Guatemala. And this is a place where I had no expectation of the food. I thought it's going to be the same as in South America, like in most places, very similar. And I was quite surprised that especially the street food there was really, really good and really tasted really fresh, nice quality. And it's not something you've ever heard of. Like, no one has ever talked about food from Guatemala. But
I never heard. Yeah, you're right.
yeah, right. So I had no expectation of it, and then I went in there and I had really, really amazing food there, and I was quite surprised by that.
Nice. What was it after the second Asian experience? What was the next destination?
That was a tough one for me because I had spent at that point like 9 months in Asia, and I had the feeling I had seen the things that were in my mind before I started traveling the world. And that made it much harder for me to make a decision of where to go next, because I felt like, okay, now should I go back to the places where I went to and explore more, or should I see like some new places? And I was a bit lost. I was, again, back home, I was a bit lost and like didn't know what to do. I didn't at that point, I hadn't made the decision that I will continue travel. So I wasn't sure about that. At some point I made the decision, okay, I'm going to continue traveling for a while. And then it was just by chance that a friend of mine asked me whether I want to come to Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, and that was not on my map at all. I never thought of going there. And she asked me if I wanted to come. There's this big event that happens every 2 years in Kyrgyzstan or Kazakhstan, and at that time it was in Kazakhstan. It's kind of the Olympic Games for Nomad sports. And I looked at just some images on Google Images. I was like, okay, I just want to see how it looks like. And I looked on Google Images, and when I saw it, and I was like, okay, wow, I actually have to go there. This is amazing. And so I just booked my flights, and I said, okay, I'm just gonna join you, and see the games there, and then spend a bit more time in Kazakhstan. And so that decision kind of came natural with that, but it was also lucky, just by chance, that I actually had reached out to that friend, and then that she invited me. Sometimes these things happen, and I think then you have to just grab that opportunity and go with it. And it was lucky that I was lost at the time and didn't have any certain place that I also wanted to go to, but was maybe secretly hoping for something like this to come up. So it turned out perfectly.
Was that the beginning of which year was what? That was hard. Which year was that?
So that was 2024.
That was beginning of 24 then.
That was summer 2024.
Summer of 24. Okay. So you went there, and it must have been a completely different experiences from everything that you have experienced until now, right?
Absolutely.
Until then.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that you said in one of the answers on your AMA, you say that the most surprisingly for you was the kindness of the people there.
Yeah, this was quite surprising, because again, I tried to go in with no expectations, but in my mind, I was expecting a country with like, where it's very cold, it's dark, and like there's a lot of steppe, there's a lot of nothingness, basically a lot of desert.
Cold and dark Germany.
Yeah, that is true actually.
I'm sorry.
So I wasn't expecting the kindest people, right? No, I'm joking, but Yeah, so I was expecting like that people will like be more closed off, be more kind of to themselves, like not talk so much to foreigners or be like suspicious of them or something. I don't even know where that really came from, but I that was just kind of a feeling that I had in my head. And when I arrived, in the capital of Kazakhstan, in Astana, and it's an eerie dystopian kind of city when you arrive. And I still remember the drive in from the airport in the taxi, and it's a huge city with like skyscrapers and like massive streets, and there's no one. There's just building, but you don't see I didn't see a single person on the street, and it felt like I arrived 2 weeks after the world had ended. So it had this very dystopian feeling and it was cold. It was the beginning of September, but it was like 4 degrees, 3, 4 degrees. Um, and so my first reaction was that this is kind of strange and, it feels very cold and very uncomfortable, in a way. And I arrived in a hostel, and there was also a bunch of people that were not very talkative. So I was kind of a bit on the fence of how it's going to be. And that's why even when I was there, my first impression was that kind of my gut feeling was right. And it only later turned out that I was completely wrong, actually. And these were some of the kindest people I've met anywhere in the world, like incredibly welcoming, incredibly interested. People were super happy about foreigners visiting and being there. I remember this, like on the last day of this event, we were like a few European people kind of walking along together at the event. And we just wanted to walk for like 200 meters. And it took us, I think, like an hour because people at the end kept lining up to take photos with us because they were so interested and just like talking to us in Kazakh and in Russian. We didn't understand a word, but they still wanted to talk to us. They gave us their phone numbers so we could call them if we needed something or whatever. So it was an incredible experience to see people really be so curious and so excited and happy to see foreigners. It was really the exact opposite of what I had expected.
I think we have a really wrong understanding of the connection between the weather outside and the kindness of the people.
Mm.
And I'm telling you this because I had the same now with Finland, where I thought, okay, the people in Finland cannot be so friendly because it's dark. They don't see the light. It's always cold, and I was so wrong.
Yeah.
I was so damn wrong. Yeah.
Now I can imagine.
But this is just I think just a prejudice that we have, and I think that's something that only travel can cure, right? When you actually meet the people.
Absolutely, and I think it's also a little bit geographically. We maybe have, I don't know, we connect Kazakhstan with Russia, for example, and if we look on the news and we see things about Russia, it's always negative, and so we probably have a negative feeling about Russian people, even though I've heard like amazing things of people that were traveling through Russia, of how nice and hospitable people were. So, and it's really hard to disconnect from that. So I think sometimes you really have to go there and be there to be able to disconnect from the prejudice that you have in your mind.
Correct, 100%.
Yeah.
What was the next goal or the next destination, Carl?
So at that point, I spent more time in Central Asia, since I was already kind of around. My first experience there was really, really nice. So I spent quite a bit of time in Kazakhstan. I then went from there to Kyrgyzstan, which is just you just cross the border. It's really close, which was amazing as well. And then from Kyrgyzstan, went to Uzbekistan and just spent a bit of time there. So I spent most of the time in Kazakhstan, and then about 2 weeks in Kyrgyzstan and 2 weeks in Uzbekistan.
So quite a good amount of time, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. For a first time, I would say yes. I'm really eager to go back, actually. Especially Kyrgyzstan, there's still a lot to explore. Uzbekistan, there's a lot to explore. Go on.
From all these experiences, Carl, one thing you never mentioned until now in our discussion, and I'm really curious about. how was it from the safety perspective? Did you ever have had an area during these travels where you felt unsafe or when you felt unease?
Mm. That's I think it's something that is very personal, right? Like how safe you actually feel and how safe you actually are two things that are not
Correct.
always connected. And I guess the only place where I really felt unsafe was Rio in Brazil, and it's still one of my most favorite cities in the world. But I think there it was mainly because the people that I was with around, like in the hostel, every day there would be someone coming up saying, "Hey, I was robbed here. Something happened here. Something happened here. Something happened to my friend." And so it's different if you hear that in the news or you hear that somewhere else or you read it. But then if you hear it from someone that you see like every single day that something happened, then it really makes you think more and be more aware of your surroundings and so on. So that's, I think, one of the very few places where I felt unsafe. Even though nothing happened to me. Maybe I was lucky, maybe I mean, I guess still most people that are there, nothing will happen to them, and it's still a minority of people that get robbed and where something happens. But that's at least where I personally felt the most unsafe because it was so apparent that things happen all the time there. In other places, some were surprisingly safe, especially like Central Asia, for example. A lot of people ask me in Kazakhstan. It's often the first question is whether I felt safe or whether it was safe, actually. And it was probably one of the places where I felt the safest of all the ones that I went to, and where I never heard anyone have any issues, something being stolen or they're being robbed or anything. So I think it's a very personal feeling of like, where do I feel safe? I think in South America, of course, it's a difference whether it's easier as a man. That's just given. And I think it's also your looks. If I was completely white with like blue eyes and blonde and very tall, then maybe in Colombia I would stick out more and be more of a target than I am. So, right.
That was a good one.
But I mean, it's true, right? How
I can believe that.
much
Yeah.
attention do you just draw
Wow.
to yourself in a place? And so I think for me it was easier to feel safe in places like Colombia or Ecuador. But yeah, it's a personal feeling, and I think in like most places that I went to, I felt really safe. In Asia, I never even think about not being safe, even though stuff can happen, but I never had that feeling that I'm somewhere in danger. And Rio was really the only city where I had a little bit of that feeling, but still really enjoyed my time there. It's still an amazing place to be.
Mm-hmm. You came home, I do suppose, from mid Asia when you finished the small trip there.
Mm.
I call it small trip, even though it was a few weeks, but compared to the others,
Yeah.
you arrive home again for a small battery recharge at home.
Mhm.
What was the next one? The next goal?
So at that time, I went back home for Christmas again, stayed again for Christmas for about 2 weeks. And then I had some friends that were going to South America. That was the second time. Then I went to South America. I actually surprised them there. They didn't know that I would be coming. And our initial plan was to celebrate New Year's in Buenos Aires in Argentina. And I told them that I cannot come and I have to go somewhere else and so on. I just made up some excuse. And I arrived in the morning on the 31st of December, just in time for New Year's, and then celebrated with them. And then thought, right, now that I'm here again, some of the things that I didn't do the first time around when I was there, now it's the time to do them. And it's also about like in which season you're going, which months you're going. At the first time I went, I started in April and then went until, or like March, April, and went until the summer. And then this time I went in December. So there were places that were not really accessible at the first time when I went, and now they were accessible. Now I could actually go. So I actually planned it around some of those experiences that I wasn't able to have the first time. and then do it this time.
You said that you were usually not planning much in advance any of your trips, like it was more spontaneous decision. Have you ever had the situation in which you thought, "Oh, I want to go next, or I want to go the day after tomorrow in this country, but I need a visa for that"? Have you ever had that?
With the visa, I think the only time where I had an issue with the visa was in going to Vietnam, because I hadn't realized that I actually need one, and that's kind of maybe some European arrogance, but yeah, yeah, probably. So, and
If I would have it as well, I know what you mean.
so I didn't realize I need one actually, and so I tried to apply for one, and you can do it online. To apply for one, just the website to apply is absolutely horrendous, and it was an absolute nightmare to fill out the form online, because you have a form that you fill out which is incredibly long. You have to list a lot of things and stuff like that, and then you get to the part where you pay, and then you put in all your bank details, and it says it didn't go through. And the only advice people give you is like, do that 10 to 20 times, and at some point it will work, and no one knows why. And so you have to start the whole process again. You have to fill out everything again that you filled out before. It takes again 10 minutes, and then it's declined. And I did that. And I think it took like 10 or 12 times, and then it just said payment accepted. And then it worked. And then you still have to wait, and you never know how long. And it was like exactly a week before my flight was. And I didn't know how long it was going to take. Like sometimes it takes a day or two, sometimes it takes a week, sometimes longer. And so I was getting, of course, more nervous and nervous as the day approached that I would fly. And I got it the day before, in the evening, actually, before our flight. So I was quite lucky to get it in time. I think that
For
was
sure.
the time where I actually really was scared about not being able to enter a country.
Look, I have a Romanian citizenship, and I do live in Germany. I do book my travels from here. And 2 years ago, we had a family trip to the US, and our flight back was cancelled. And talking about European arrogance, I got the message from Lufthansa, from the company, and they said, "Yeah, your flight was cancelled. You are booked on a connecting or a flight that goes through Montreal." And I called the Lufthansa call center. I said, "Guys, thank you. You are really nice, but I'm not allowed to enter Canada because I need a transit visa."
Yeah.
"No, you don't." "Yes, I need." "No, you don't." "Yes, I need, because I know my visas."
Yeah, fair enough.
And that was a nice conversation talking about the European arrogance.
Yeah.
So I think it's really hard to understand that it's not so easy as you want it to be sometimes.
That is true. That is true. Like you keep forgetting, like if you have a privilege, you keep forgetting that there are places where you need one, and you just you don't you're not prepared for it. And it changed in some countries as well. I mean, I know the visa process from other, like I went to China like 16 years ago, for example, and that was a weeks long process where you go to the embassy, you bring your passport and all that stuff. But that was the last time I ever did that, and I know for others that's just reality, that every time they go somewhere they actually have to do that. So
Exactly.
yeah, I just forgot about it. That's
Carl, how long was the second piece in South America?
That was again about 5.5 months, like something like this. I came back in the summer again.
Summer of 25 then?
That was summer of 25, yeah.
Considering that we still have 6 months, that was the last trip until now, or it was always still something in between?
There was a bit in between. I would say less of a trip. At that time, I knew, okay, I'm kind of a bit. That also sounds weird, but I'm kind of done with traveling for a bit. Just because I felt like I want more of a routine, and I miss being able to just sleep in the same bed every night, to just go to the gym, to just eat healthy, and all of that stuff that is really hard to do when you're on the road. But so I made kind of the decision that I will start looking for jobs again, like slowly. But since I didn't have a place, or I don't have a place actually back home, in Austria, for me, I was like, okay, I'm actually gonna fly to Bali. I'm gonna set up my base there because I can live there quite cheaply. I know some people already there. I have some friends there that I can spend time with and so on. And I'm just gonna set up my base there. My plan is also to stay in Asia, in that region. So for me, that was kind of a perfect base. And one of my friends, he said he will come along, like from back home, just for the first couple of weeks, and he wants me to show him a bit around and spend some time there. So that's kind of what we did. So I stayed for some time in Bali when my visa expired. So this is where I also have to at least leave at some point. I went to Thailand for like 2 weeks just because of the visa, and then came back to Bali and from there to Timor-Leste, which was also kind of a impulsive decision because I just literally looked a year before, where I also was in Bali, looked on Google Maps, and I kind of zoomed out and I was looking around what countries exist kind of around me. And then I saw it on Google Maps and I was like, wait, I've actually never heard of this country. Like, how do I get there? And there's only 3 airports that actually fly to Timor-Leste. So you can only fly there from Singapore, from Bali, and then from Darwin in Australia. And so I thought, okay, since I'm already in Bali, like now it would make sense actually to go there. And I asked one of my friends who was there at the time as well, and he agreed to come. And so we went to Timor-Leste for a week just to see kind of how it is and what it's about. And it was quite an interesting experience. But that was the last proper trip.
You said at the beginning that you studied in the US as part of your studies, so you've been there for, I would guess, from an abroad semester.
Mm-hmm.
Even though this US experience was there, I never heard you interested in any of the, I would call it, over-civilized areas. Can I ask you why?
I think it's not that I'm not interested. I think there's very few places that I'm not interested in. I probably couldn't even name a single one now, but
North Korea.
I think there's, sorry?
North Korea.
I was considering going there in April, so that's a different story. But no, I think it has like 2 sides to it. One of them is budget, which of course, if you're traveling for a longer time, to stretch your budget, it's easier to go to places that are cheaper. That's just how it is. So my budget would have lasted much shorter if I would have spent a lot of time in Scandinavia or Switzerland or places like this, or even in the US. So the US is just really expensive for some of these places, or even Singapore and so on. The other thing is, I think for me, is that it's more similar to what I'm used to. So since I've lived in Central Europe, I've lived in the US, I've lived in the UK, I'm just more used to these kind of over-civilized places, and it's easier for me to travel to these places from back home, and I've done that extensively around Europe at least, and I've been to the US also quite a lot. So I feel like there's less of an experience for me to have than there is in other places. And some of the things that people want to see are maybe less of a priority for me, or like culturally, there are things that I find more interesting maybe in an Asian country than I would find in let's say Canada or the US. And that's more of an importance for me. Like for me, it's more important to have a culture that is really different from mine, and where I can really see how that culture is, can learn from that culture, and really experience that. Whereas if I go to a culture that's very similar, then there's not as much of a interesting experience for me, I think.
I have the same problem with the over touristic places, to be honest, and I have to say this is something because it's not enjoyable anymore. It's really not something that you can say, okay, I can go there and see it and so on, because you cannot see anything, you cannot move. I think the one of the worst experience of my last holiday was Pisa. Because I was there the first time, I think in the peak of COVID, somewhere in 2021, and there was no one there. And it was so enjoyable. It was so nice because I could get to walk with my son and my wife there, and everything was amazing. And I was there last year, man. That was the worst decision. It was a disaster. It's I really I have to say it's an amazing place, but from the touristic perspective, I don't recommend it to anyone. It's such a bad experience, and everybody's doing this picture where they pretend to hold the Tower of Pisa, and this is just stupid. Sorry, I have to say. I'm sorry to go on this rant, but I have to say I have the same problem. And when I was in the US, I tried to avoid the at least the places where everyone was trying to go. So I was in a lot of places in South Carolina, North Carolina, which was no. I was there for the culture as well, to be honest, because luckily I was there before due to work, and I met some really nice people because I was there for I think 3.5 weeks, and I tried to give the same experience for my family as well, because I think the culture in there is beautiful as well. But I do get what you are saying. Yes.
Yeah.
A bit more of a
I
technical.
absolutely agree on this. And yeah, in this over touristic, like Bali, for example, is also an over touristic place where you have a bit of both. And then others, that was kind of a learning for me at the beginning as well, that at the beginning I started to check places where I want to go a little bit on like TikTok and Instagram. And I was like checking like, okay, Malaysia, places to go, whatever. And I realized that like following that, like following all those videos and all that content that comes out will just end. Like at the end, I will just go to these places where everyone is. And in the same way that you went to like Pisa, like everyone will be there, do the same photo. And I ended up in some of those places. And afterwards, I really asked myself, okay, did I actually enjoy this? Like, was it worth like coming here? And the answer was mostly no. So I kind of tried to get away from basing where I go on the place and more on the experience. And I was like, okay, do I want to hike in like very high mountains? Okay, I go to Nepal, and that's because I want to do a hike. I want to be in the mountains and stuff like this. And less because I saw like someone going to like this specific hike or this specific mountain or whatever in a video. And I think that's kind of important to make that differentiation, because if you follow all these videos and everything, you will end up at the places where everyone takes the same video, everyone takes the same photo. And then even I took the same photo, I took the same videos, I did exactly the same as everyone else. And then I looked at it and I was like, okay, like, it looks exactly the same, like the ones that I saw. Like, what's the point?
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why, even though it's not that far away, I have a problem visiting Rome, because everybody's there. Everybody's there, and this is something which I don't know how to make it enjoyable, but
yeah, and it's the same with Venice. Like, I love Venice, for example. Venice is an amazingly beautiful place, but it's so overcrowded. It's so full of people, and it's hard to enjoy it. It makes it really, really hard to enjoy it.
I managed to find a place, and I should not say this out loud, but I managed to find not a place, but a period in Venice, which is not that crowded, and that's somewhere end of January, beginning of February, so now. But you have to be lucky with the weather. Okay. That's the only thing.
Yeah.
I love Venice as well, but I have the same problem. At the end, you know what we don't realize, the same discussion with the traffic. You always complain being in traffic and having to wait in traffic jams, but you are the traffic.
Yeah, of course.
It's the same thing with the tourists.
Yeah, of course. When you're there,
you're part of the problem.
Of course.
Yeah, that's it. Carl, a bit of a technical question out of own curiosity. You mentioned a few times internet, Wi-Fi, and so on. Were you always connected? Like through all of this period when you traveled, you were always able to get internet and at okay prices, so that you have connection everywhere?
Depends on the place, but in most places, yes. So I would always look for like an eSIM, for example, before so I didn't bring any laptop, so I do everything on my phone while I travel. There's no laptop with me. but I try to get like an eSIM in most places if it's affordable, and if it's okay. It's usually a bit more expensive than if you would get a local one. In some places, it's crazy much more expensive to get an eSIM, and then I would just try to get a local SIM card. In some places, it's really nice. Like for example, in Malaysia and Singapore, you can get local kind of SIM cards, but that are then valid in like other countries like Thailand and Cambodia, for example,
Okay.
Indonesia as well. And so you can just get this for like 1 or 2 months, and then you're actually sorted if you go to one of these other countries. So I just try to get like a SIM card everywhere I go with enough data to get around. I mean, if you are staying in a hostel, then you will have Wi-Fi in some of the cafes sometimes. And I mean, if there's a power outage, then no one has internet anyway. And in some places, like if you go hiking in the mountains, then of course you will have no reception as well. I felt it's more difficult to find the places where you're not connected constantly, and where you can actually shut off your phone and not need it for a day than the other way around.
As long as you do it as a decision on your own is okay, but I think also the safety and the orientation perspective is really important in these days, and it's easy to do it, and I think it's helpful. It's really helpful to have the possibility to do that. Again, another technical question, because I have my own my own curiosities that I haven't found the actual answer to on your Ask Me Anything. What was the payment method of choice? Were you doing card payments? Did you use cash? Did you ever have the feeling, oh, I don't want to pay here because this POS looks funny? How was the process of paying for things for you?
50-50, I would say, depending on the country. Like in some places, Brazil, for example, you can pay literally anything and everything by card. There's not a dime of cash that you will need, even once, regardless of how
Okay,
much
that's
time you spend
interesting.
there, which I found really interesting. That was like an interesting learning. Like I arrived and I was like, oh wow, I can really pay everything by card. So that was interesting. In a lot of places, of course, cash is king. I tried always to bring a few $100s in cash in US dollars with me, like some smaller notes, or like at least have $100 in like $20 bills or something. Because dollars is just, everyone will take dollars. If
Universal.
the other option is that you don't have money and you can't pay them, then everyone will take dollars anywhere in the world. That always works. With euros, it was a bit more difficult in some places. But that always works as kind of an emergency thing to have. Otherwise, I just try to take out cash, try to look online where I can take out cash. There are some apps that tell you where there's ATMs with like no fees or very, very few fees as well, like worldwide. That's really helpful sometimes because those can add up really quickly as well. And yeah, so I think it was just a mix of that, just cash. I never had any problems with like POS or something, or ATMs or anything. I had my card being used once in Nepal, and it was actually quite inconvenient because I didn't have another card with me. So my card was blocked and I was running out of cash. So I had to ask some people that I met along the way if they can actually like lend me some cash until I get to a place where my stuff was, where I have a second bank card with me. So it also helps to have like 2 bank cards as well, just in case one, you can even lose one or something happens or it breaks or whatever. You never know. So, and it's sometimes tedious to get your cards if you're somewhere else or you're traveling around. You don't know where you're going to be in like 5 days. So that can really, just become a problem, and where you have to change your plans according to that. So I didn't want to have that. So it's good to have just 2 cards with you, but then take cash with you. That's was worked for me.
It's interesting that you travel so many countries and you never had an issue with your card except this once when it was blocked. But I think that's something that can always happen. So that has nothing to do with scams or something like this. But I think it's safe to say that if you are careful enough, you don't have you can avoid problems.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's put it like this.
For sure. No.
Carl, you had a crazy experience, man. I have to say I uh, I
I know.
I have to say it's incredible. But I have to ask you, did this 3 years of traveling changed you, Carl?
Um, I think, I mean, any time period will change you regardless of what you do, I guess. But um, the traveling part, not as much, I think. Like, it's just a lot of experiences. You meet a lot of people. Of course, you're influenced by those people that you meet, by the cultures that you see, by the ways of life also that you see. I think it helps you kind of to calibrate a little bit of how serious you take yourself and life as well. If you see how much is out there and what other people are doing and how other people are living, um, that really helps with that. What really changed for me was, I think, more the experience of not being attached to any place and like not having an apartment, not being around my friends, not being around my family. All those things that kind of use up headspace every day. Like you think about your job, you think about, oh, I need to do this in the apartment, I need to buy groceries, I need to do this, blah, 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 blah. So you spend a lot of headspace on all of these things. And then you have some things that you maybe want to work on yourself, or some problems that you have, or traumas or whatever. And those get very little headspace because you're busy with your daily life. And I had the feeling that as soon as I took out all of these factors, I don't have to think about an apartment. I don't think about my friends, like, or they're not around me at least. No one is influencing me. Suddenly that headspace gets taken up by things that I should be working on, or should have been working on myself, or some problems that I've had. Um, and suddenly I have a thought process that starts going in circles around these problems. And that was really surprising to me, because I felt like, okay, now this is taking up so much headspace. I actually have to change something. I have to actually do something, and I have to work on these problems, because now I have the time and I have the headspace to do it. And there's not so many distractions, even though, of course, you're doing a lot of things, you're experiencing a lot of things, but these are all positive things that happen every day. So you still have a lot of, just space, and your mind is in a state where you can work on these problems. I think that's the biggest change that happened for me, is having that experience and then really starting from there to work on some of these things over the time.
That's something that I haven't thought about, but you're right. I mean, the daily routine is eating your headspace for sure.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of
And your
sense. That was-
energy as well. I mean, you spend like a third of your day at work, but it's probably like 80% of your energy. So you have 20% maybe of your energy, or even less, for everything else that happens in your life in those like next
Correct.
8-9 hours that you're gonna be awake. So it's really hard to spend much energy on all the topics in the way that you maybe should or would want to.
The important things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it is important things. Absolutely. Yeah.
Carl, before we wrap it up, I have usually a series of 5 rapid fire questions that I try to tailor on the guest. They are never rapid fire, but they are also like direct questions that I ask at the end.
Yeah.
The first one is one country that surprised you the most, and why? And even if it's Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan, you can still say it, even though we talked about it.
Yeah, I'm trying not to say these two. So that's
I thought about even to say besides those, but I don't want to make it too hard.
yeah. No, I want to say Indonesia here. Surprised me the most. I went in without any expectations. I knew that, people in Asia are friendly, and like I would say it's a common stereotype that Asian people are generally friendly. And I knew it from Thailand or other places, but Indonesia was the one place where the people stood out for me the most and that's really 99% of the people that I've interacted with, were just really genuinely incredibly friendly, really smiling the whole day and the whole time, and being just overly friendly, but without having any motive behind it. Like, it was not because someone wanted to sell something to me or whatever. But in every interaction that I've had with, regardless of this was some service or not, or it was just a person on the street that would start talking to me for no reason, they would just for the sake of talking. Even in the most touristic places where there's millions of tourists going through every year, they still remain incredibly friendly and incredibly genuine. And that was really, really surprising to me, because I had experienced that in other Asian countries, but not to that extent and not as genuine. It felt in a few Asian countries that it was always tied to some sort of transaction, and that I would be seen as kind of a superior because I'm now the one paying for some service or something, which felt really weird and wrong to me. And in Indonesia, I had more the feeling that we're like always talking eye to eye, regardless of whether that's some service or not, or some transaction or whatever. I'm just being seen as a human, and I see them as humans, and we just talk on that level. So that was really surprising for me.
You realize in those cases, right, that the amount of money that they have is not what brings them happiness, because most of them are just living at the limit and so on. And I think that's something that helps you realize as well that the importance that we set on money is much higher than it should be.
Absolutely, yeah.
What was harder, Carl, coming home or deciding to leave again?
Both are hard. I think it switches. It starts with coming home is harder at the beginning, and then it gets easier, and leaving gets kind of harder just as you progress. Like, the longer you're away, the harder it is once you're at home to leave again. So the first time I left, as I said, like, I was okay to like leave. I was like, okay, I just want to see more. I want to experience more. Now when I leave, I'm really heartbroken to leave my friends. So that switched, really, really switched. And coming home, I feel anxious about both. And I know, like, every time I come back home, like 5 days beforehand, even though I'm really happy to go home and to see my friends, I'm really anxious about how it's going to be, even though I've absolutely no reason to be anxious about it. And every time I leave, I begin to be anxious about it, like 3-4 days beforehand, because both of it, you go kind of a little bit into the unknown. And I think that's scary. That just stays scary.
One thing that long-term travel teach you that your normal life couldn't have?
I think detachment from like money and from belongings. That's something I really had to learn from myself. Maybe others are better at this, but for me, I don't know, it was really important to have my career progress and to save up a lot of money and to see like more money on my bank account every month. As I said, I didn't buy anything big. I didn't spend really, really money. And I loved my apartment. I loved like all the furniture and like all the decorations and all of that stuff. So it was really hard to give that away. Like that, I was like heartbroken to give all that stuff away and to give that comfort away. And then you go out, and 3-4 months later, you think about it, and you realize you hadn't thought about any of those things for months, like not even a little bit. And I came back, as I told you, in the summer, to Austria, and I kind of opened one of the boxes where I kept like some clothing and stuff from myself, and I really rediscovered all those things, because if someone would have thrown away these boxes, I wouldn't have been able to tell you one thing that is inside, because I just forgot about it. And I was like, oh wait, I have these pants. Wait, oh wow, this shirt. Oh yes, I bought it a few years ago. Like, you forget about it if you're wearing the same 5 shirts every week. And the same 2 pants, and you run around in flip-flops, like, you just forget about all that stuff, and you just don't think about it anymore. And it just loses any importance and is out of your existence. It doesn't have anything to do with your existence anymore. And the same goes with the money, right? So you said before, which is very right. Like having money doesn't make happy. This doesn't make you happy. And I think that's true. Like, I think not having money makes you unhappy, but having money doesn't necessarily make you happy. And once you get out of that zone where you're kind of working just to survive and you're working to build your quality of life, you can build it for a while, but then it kind of stops at some point, and there's not, buying that new decoration or the like slightly bigger TV or whatever, that will not add too much to your quality of life anymore. But at the same time, keeping that money on your bank account and having more and more and more every month doesn't really make you happy as well. So I think the quality of life then really depends on how you spend your money, and what you spend it on, and not how much you have actually. And if you spend it for the things that you enjoy, like in this case for me at least, traveling, then I think you can have that bump in your quality of life again.
That's so good. Then I think one of the things which is important is to try to make yourself happy, not to live for status, not to live to get confirmation from the others, because they are not living your life. You are the one living your life, and you should be the one enjoying it, not other one's standards. Yeah.
And I think that's hard. I think that's hard now for traveling as well, because if I go on, like, again, if I open Instagram or something, I see all these reels of people like traveling. It looks amazing. Like it looks nice. But I think a lot of people have that dream of traveling, but it's not their own dream, but it's someone else's dream. And they think like, oh, I have to go out traveling, I have to save up for this or whatever, even though it's actually not for them and it's not their dream. So I think it becomes harder not to live someone else's dream, because someone else's dream looks very nice on social media. That becomes really, really hard.
What social media is doing is bringing only the pluses, not the minuses. And I think this is also an issue. I don't know if you know Ramsey. He's a guy that is doing financial consulting or advising, and he has a show since here in the US. He's on the US market, and he said a really interesting thing is that whenever we were in our neighborhood at home in the US, was the saying of keeping up with the Joneses, like to have, if they bought a new car, you should buy a new car. If they bought 2 new cars, you have to buy 2 new cars, and so on. But he said, as we said there, the Jones were living on down the street from your house, and you knew when Mrs. Jones were having a fight with Mr. Jones, and you knew that the kids had some issues in school, and you also knew the bad things. But on Instagram, you don't see this.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
You only see the pluses, because they never post about the minuses.
Absolutely.
Nobody's doing that, and I think that's why social media is so bad, because you are living somebody else's dream life, which is not actually their actual life, right? It's their dream life that you are living, that even themselves are not living it.
Absolutely.
So, you told me what travel gave you, but what travel took away from you?
I think there's a lot of sacrifices to it. I mean, I talked about the personal belongings. That's a sacrifice you have to make. The comfort of your own home, being able to sleep in the same bed and wake up in the same bed every day. I mean, I think that is something that is very important and can give you quality of life as well. Then, of course, like not seeing your friends, not seeing your family, all of these things, that's a sacrifice you also make, and something that you have to weigh in when you think of, should I do this? Should I go out? How long should I be away? And all of that stuff. The budget, of course, money, that's a question. That's a sacrifice you have to make. You have to detach yourself from that money and be like, okay, this money is gone now, and maybe I won't buy a car for the next 2 years or for the next 3 years, or I won't buy that apartment or whatever, like, so there's a lot of sacrifices. And I think for me, it's more the personal sacrifices of not being around your friends, not being around your family, not having that comfort, sometimes being lonely, sometimes feeling lost. That's like the hardship of it is kind of the sacrifice that you do for all the nice things that you get.
Is there on the other side also a fear of missing out? Because usually the fear of missing out is when you don't travel, when you sit at home and you see the others traveling. But is it happening the other way around as well?
Rarely, to be honest. Quite rarely. So, no, I didn't have the feeling that I missed out. I just had the feeling that I, missed the friends or something, and that I would want to be with them right now. I more often had the feeling of like having an experience and thinking, oh, I would like to have this friend or like my brother or whoever with me right now to have that experience together. And I'm kind of missing out having that experience with like someone else. And now it's just for myself. So it's a different fear of missing out. It's fear of someone else missing out, and in that way, you're also missing out on that experience. Not so much on the things that were happening back home here.
That makes sense. Carl, if someone would be in front of you and they would say, I would do the same, I want to do the same thing that you have done, what would you warn them about first?
I think what we've talked about, like, make sure this is your dream. Make sure this is not someone else's dream you're living. That's really, really, really important. Try to make it for the right reasons. Like, I was really trying to make this in a way and to plan it in a way that it's not an escape for me from my life here. I tried to have my life here as comfortable as I wanted it to be. And then really focus on what I want to have from it, what kind of experiences I want to do, what kind of places I want to see, and not think about, oh, I don't want to be here because it's winter and it's cold and it's dark and blah, 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 and so on. So I think the motivation, having the right motivation and going out with that motivation, making the decision because of that motivation is really, really, really important. I think that's like two key factors, is really go out for the right reasons and because you really, really want it. Because it just comes with sacrifice in a lot of different ways. And it has to be worth it for you.
Makes absolutely sense.
Yeah.
Last question of today, Carl. I promise I will let you go after this. Where is home?
Difficult one. I think for me now, the last few years, Austria has become the less I'm here, the more it has become my home, which is kind of counterintuitive.
That's interesting.
But yeah, the less I was here, the more it felt like home every time I was here. And the more I was excited about being here, the more I could appreciate all the places, the food, the people, everything. Of course, there's downsides to the place here, and I feel like I have other places that I would also call home now as well, because I have some friends there, because I like living there, because I like being there. But yeah, for me, like being away from what was my home before, where it felt less like a home, really made it more of my home. It sounds strange and it's weird even to say it, but that's how I feel right now. And it's about the people, right? It's the people that you have around you. It's those friendships that went on for decades in the family and everything, where you can just sit with them. You don't have to explain anything. You're not new. You're just you, and that's it. And everything comes off easy.
I think it's more and more the same thing. That is not the place, is the feeling. It's just the feeling of home, right? It's not especially Austria, but just the people that you have there that you meet when you go back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Carl, thank you so much for being here today.
Of course, thank you so much.
Thank you for taking the time. Thank you. I'm trying. Thanks so much for your time. Much appreciated. I took a lot of your time today. I hope that that your story is inspiring at least one person when they see this episode, and that would make me happy, even to do it or maybe not to do it.
Yeah.
Like I think that's important to have it in both ways.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely.
And man, I'm extremely honest when I'm telling you, I don't know, next year when you're coming back from whomever you are living, just drop me an email and we can do this again.
Perfect. That sounds great.
Thanks so much. Have a nice one.
Thank you.
Bye.
You too.